Hi everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks, and today it's Wednesday, which means it's Serial Killer Wednesdays. And today's a really interesting one. Today we are going to talk about Dennis Nilsen. Now, I had heard of him. I hadn't really heard of his crimes until I kind of delved into him and started researching. Yeah, interesting one. So today we're actually going to start off with his childhood and then lead up to the murders that he unfortunately committed. And interestingly enough, Dennis Nilsen is also a Scottish serial killer. Got my handy little book of stories, so let's go. Okay, so Dennis's father was named Olaf Magnus Nilsen, and he was a Norwegian soldier. He was evacuated to Scotland after the Nazis had unfortunately conquered his country. His mother, who was a local Scottish fisherman's daughter, married Olaf in May 1942 and had 3 children, an older brother called Olaf Jr., then Dennis, then a younger sister called Sylvia. In 1948, unfortunately, the couple divorced. And actually, Olaf, Dennis's father, he actually didn't want children, so this actually kind of suited him very well. And then it was during this time, so Olaf was no longer in the picture, so the grandfather stepped up to the plate and kind of became like a father figure to all the children. Dennis got particularly close to his grandfather. They would go on fishing trips together, go out on the boat together. But unfortunately, Halloween, his grandfather did have a heart attack when he was out on a job, I believe. Dennis was only 6 at the time, but this actually did have a very profound effect on him. This then led to the funeral, and it was at this time that Dennis actually saw the body of his grandfather. And I think this is where everything kind of began. It was quite traumatic, especially when you're 6 and you're seeing a dead body. So that did actually have quite a significant effect on him. He then became quiet and reserved, and anyone who did attempt to show him affection, he would just shun them away. He didn't want that. He did, however, enjoy going to the harbour alone and watching the boats go out, going fishing. However, it was between 1954 or 1955, the dates aren't exactly accurate, he somehow became submerged in the water, and initially he did begin to panic. He couldn't get himself up to the surface, but then after, I'm not sure how long it was, but then he eventually calmed himself down, and I think it was like a couple of teenagers had seen him and helped him get out of the water. So again, that was another very traumatic event, especially again, he was very young at this time, and I wonder if it's like these traumatic events that kind of led him to doing the things that he did do. And he actually did nearly die at that point. Shortly after this incident, his mother remarried and the family moved to the village of Stricken, so I imagine it's a small Scottish village. And at the beginning of puberty, Dennis was actually very unsure about his sexuality. Boys, he basically noticed that the boys he was attracted to had a very similar look to his siblings. So he was obviously very confused about this. So to kind of test this, Dennis decided to unfortunately sexually abuse both his sister and his brother. I don't know if his sister knew about it because it said they were asleep during this time, but his brother did wake up during this encounter and basically started bullying him and called him some sort of name which basically was making fun of Dennis for being gay. At 14, he decided to leave the village and joined the army cadets with the eventual kind of goal that he would join the army. And that he did join the army, and his first destination was in West Germany. At this point, he did drink a lot, and I suppose you could say that he was a functional alcoholic. And this was to kind of just decrease the shyness that he had and to kind of try and socialise himself a bit more. One time he actually passed out. I found this quite odd, but he basically passed out and hoped for someone to have sex with him while he was unconscious. This was quite a fantasy of Dennis's. I'm unsure why. And in 1967, while stationed in Yemen, many of his companions in the army had actually been kidnapped and murdered, and this actually happened to Dennis as well. He was abducted, but he did manage to escape. Basically, the driver had pulled over, went into the trunk to get Dennis out, and Dennis just punched him, knocked him to the ground, and beat him until he was unconscious. Because of this, he was granted his own room, and he began pleasuring himself to his own image in the mirror, like while looking in the mirror. In 1972, Dennis retired from the army and returned home. And at this time, Nilsen had never had a relationship, had never had a girlfriend, and his family were quite worried about him. They were worried that he didn't have that companionship. And his brother actually took him to a meeting in which Nilsen was defending gay rights. He then told the family that he believed he was gay, and this kind of caused a rift in the family, especially between him and his brother. I mean, I think it was like the 70s at this point, and I believe that in the UK, being gay was actually illegal at this point. So now we're going to move on to the crimes, and there are a lot of them. So the first victim was 14-year-old Stephen Holmes, and Dennis actually didn't know that Stephen was 14. He believed that he was 17 because he was in a pub and he was getting drinks, so it's kind of like mistaken age. I don't know. But they met at the Bricklewood Arms pub on December 30th, 1978. Nilsen was drinking heavily as per usual, and again, this is also what caused him to believe that the young boy was 17 years old. He then invited the boy back to his home, where they drank until both of them fell asleep. And it was during this time that Nilsen actually feared that the young boy would wake up and leave him. He didn't want to be alone. So the next day was like New Year's Eve, and he did not want to be alone on New Year's Eve. So he then strangled the boy with a necktie until the boy became unconscious, and then he drowned the young boy in a bucket of water. After this, Nilsen masturbated twice over the body before hiding it under the floorboards. So it's kind of like, I think because of his past trauma with seeing a dead body, I guess he maybe felt attraction to dead, but he does describe himself as a necrophiliac, I believe that's the right word. And he is attracted to men, but while they're dead. I don't think he actually ever had sex with the bodies. He just, not that it makes it any better, of course it doesn't, but he did masturbate over the bodies. 8 months later, he built a pyre and burned the body. In October 1979 was his second victim. He met a student from Hong Kong, Andrew Ho, in a pub, and just like with the first victim, he lured him back to the flat with the promise of sex. And actually, Ho escaped, luckily, when Nilsen had attempted to strangle him. He was actually questioned about the incident, like Nilsen was, but Ho didn't actually want to press charges. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it was because he was scared that people would find out he was there for sex. I'm not sure, but he did not want to press charges at that time. The third victim was December 1979, and he met Canadian student Kenneth Ockenden yet again in a pub. And this was actually a pub in London, and so Dennis had offered to show the guy around London and show him all the landmarks. Afterwards, he invited the student back to his flat and strangled the boy to death. The next morning, he decided to stage the body in numerous sexually explicit positions, and he then decided to take photos of these as well. And at this point as well, which is, it's quite disturbing, but again, it's all to do with the psychology, and he actually sat with the body next to him on the couch watching TV for like 2 days, which not many people would do, but I guess to him it was company, I guess. After this, he then wrapped the body in plastic bags and, like before, hid the body under the floorboards. After 2 weeks, he did dig up and re-bury the body 4 separate times, and I think during this time he would sit with the body on the couch and just drank and watched TV. So he did this numerous times. The 4th victim was 16 and a hitchhiker named Martin Duffy. He was strangled in his sleep and then further drowned in the kitchen sink, I guess to make sure that he was actually dead. Afterwards, he took the body to the bathroom, bathed the body, kissed and masturbated over the body repeatedly over the course of a couple of days. When the body began to get bloated, he again hid that body under the floorboards. In August 1980, after spraying these bodies with deodorant and insecticide to eliminate the smell and maggots, he decided to dismember these bodies and burn them out by a waste ground that was behind the building where he lived. In October of that year, Nilsen's landlord decided to renovate, and Nilsen disposed his latest victim and moved to an attic flat. For a while, he did stop committing murders because he didn't have access to a garden, he didn't have anywhere to burn the bodies, so he did stop for a little bit, but he did bring them back to his flat and again attempted to strangle them, but he didn't successfully murder anyone in this time. March 1982, he invited a young man named John Howlett for a drink over to his flat, and after this man fell asleep, Nilsen started to strangle him. Howlett woke and struggled with Nilsen, nearly getting the advantage, but unfortunately he was strangled into unconsciousness 3 times and drowned in the bathtub for 5 minutes just to make sure that he was actually dead. In January 26th of 1983, he killed his final victim, Stephen Sinclair, and on February 4th, Nilsen actually started complaining to the, I think it was like the estate agent, of a smell and clogged drain pipes, which I find quite odd because at this time he was dismembering bodies and flushing their the bits of bodies down the toilet, so he had to have known it was him causing that. But it's maybe he maybe wanted to get caught. He maybe was kind of fed up of doing this and not being able to tell anyone about it. So a plumber came out, informed Nilsen that he had found body parts in the pipes, and Nilsen actually joked that someone had had too much KFC. So the plumber returned to clear the drain, but found bones, and he became very suspicious and informed the police of this. 3 pathologists also confirmed that these bones were human. When waiting on Nilsen to come home, officers could smell very strong decomposition in his flat. At first, Dennis did pretend to be shocked that police were there, but then told police that there were actually bodily remains in his closet. He then made a full confession and led police to the area where he had destroyed these bodily remains while living in this flat. He was actually kind of talking quite casually to the police, like they got him in the police van and they had asked him a bunch of questions and he was just answering, like it was just as if you were having like a normal conversation. He didn't seem bothered, showed no emotion. It was just like blank. It was, yeah. In 1983, he was found guilty of 6 murders and 1 attempted murder and got life in prison for 25 years. On May 12th, Nilsen died of complications following stomach surgery at the age of 72. So, into the psychology now. So, with any sort of court proceedings, especially of this type of crime, you usually get defendant psychologists. So the first psychologist to speak on Nilsen's behalf was James Mckeefe, and he stated that Nilsen hadn't developed emotionally. And again, this could be because of a number of things in his childhood. If you remember, he saw the dead body of his granddad, obviously lost his granddad at quite a young age, didn't really have a father figure, and after this he kind of just shunned people away, sort of closing out emotion. And I mean, it's unknown if he actually, because within the brain you do have controls that do control your emotions, like a typical person can cry when they're sad, the only emotion he did show was anger. That was the only emotion he ever showed, everything else blank. So it could be that this particular part of the brain was damaged in some way. Yeah, he was diagnosed as having an unspecified personality disorder. Now, another psychologist did take a look at him, Patrick Galway, and he diagnosed Nilsen with borderline pseudo-normal narcissistic personality disorder. So when we say pseudo-normal, he basically presented himself as a normal person, like to other people. So he would show emotion, but that was complete pretend. And this was kind of linked up with exaggerated feelings of self-importance, with a very great need for admiration. And he also found it difficult to empathise with others. And this is also in the DSM-5. And that is the story of Dennis Nilsen. And again, with all the trauma that he kind of went through as a young child, this could have definitely led to how he was as an adult, especially seeing the naked body of his granddad. He was obviously very confused about his sexuality, which he didn't really know how to go about that. So I think this actually all led up to the crimes that he then went on to commit. I hope you've enjoyed